One of the challenges with all of us as we grow and mature is we come to life where we do the inventory with ourselves. Are we doing well? Am I achieving my goals that I have? Is my relationship what I wanted it to be, or imagined it to be, or is it getting better and becoming that? Whether we do that consciously or subconsciously, it's something that everyone goes through. What's commonly known oftentimes in the community is when someone's behavior changes dramatically. And so they say, oh, they're going through a midlife crisis. Sometimes that's because a person says, well, I've been doing this routine so much, it's time to do something different. It's time to try different things. And that's a great time for exploration. It's also a very vulnerable and dangerous time for the marriage relationship. And obviously that becomes very difficult in some other circumstances. Statistically, a lot of times that's when affairs happen, and we want to learn to avoid those, obviously. But that's when it comes up, is when someone reaches midlife crisis. And so I get the question oftentimes, how does that happen? Why does that happen? How come I didn't know they were capable of doing this behavior? I'm talking about extremes here, but yet it's a challenge that many come across, and all of us, at least a little bit in some form. The way I explain that many patients have related to is to understand how our memory works and how our character development works. One of the things I remember in grade school was how to figure out how old a tree is. I remember in first grade, and for whatever reason, it's still a thing with me. When I'm on a hike out in the forest and we go past a tree that's cut off, I like to look at the rings of a tree and count those and find out how old the tree is. Now, one of the things also when it comes to forestry is if the rings are very close together, then you know that there was not as much rainfall that year because the tree didn't grow as much. So like right here is less precipitation that year, and this year before would have been a lot of precipitation. You can even count back the years and know what years had a lot of rain and those who had a little bit of rain. Now, using that analogy is, as a hypnotherapist, I know that everything that we experience in our whole life is part of our being, part of our subconscious. It's in our body, the memories, the experiences we have, all of that. I'll just take a round number. If we're 50 years old, then everything from being born to 50 is part of being 50 years old. Let's say, like right here at 25, that's halfway. Okay. Now down here when we're 1 year old, in the very center, as we grow up through life, we have different experiences that become traumatic. One thing I mentioned before was that who we are as adults is formed 95% by the time we're 13 years old. So there's a lot of trauma that happens before we're 13. Some of that is external, and some of that is just our perception of things as our brain grows and we develop. I remember one time when I was young, well, maybe I don't remember well, but there was a time, I think I was around 7 or something, and I was waiting for a ride. Now, to a 7-year-old, being left behind at a park, waiting for your ride to show up, it feels like the eternity. And so in that time, I felt very lonely and I felt abandoned, and it was very scary. And probably it was only 10 minutes before my ride came to bring me home. But for a young child, that's a lot. And so some of it is not necessarily on purpose, but it happens. So we have these things in our life that cause trauma. Of course, there's other things happen to us that cause trauma. I bring that all up to just talk about that's how part of our system. When we meet someone and we get to know them, this is a lot rougher. Okay, so when we first get to meet them, even before we're 50, like around 20, we begin to get into each other's life. the longer we're together, the deeper we get into knowing each other. And that's part of why when we first get married, there's not a whole lot of trauma in this space. But as we get together longer and longer, we go into and we trigger those traumas that are there. And that's why we have difficulties in relationship. And coming back to the difficulties, it's back to that 95% of the problems your spouse has with you is from their childhood. And the problems they have with you is from your childhood. And because we trigger on each other, and those are opportunities to bring healing and support to each other. That's why the communication exercise I shared is a great way to talk about things and to work through the anger and the frustration, the hurt and the sadness, and bring the healing, the appreciation and the love and the support. And as we do that, then there's the healing and those things go away. Now with this foundation, this is like a top view. And if we take a side view, if this is the conscious mind right here, and this is the subconscious mind, and I'm being very generous with the conscious. Psychologists say, I mean, when I was in high school, they said, well, we don't even know 5%. Now they say we don't even know 1% of what's really going on. There's a lot going on in our subconscious mind. Anyway, as we grow and develop, we could say that we talked about the bad wolf, good wolf. So we could say, here's the bad wolf and here's the good wolf. And the one that you feed grows bigger. And if you starve the other one, it gets smaller. But the reality is, I know that as a hypnotherapist, we don't just have a bad wolf and a good wolf. Because of trauma, that gets split in half, and we might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of each, the good wolf and the bad wolf. There's each of these different ego states are different parts of our personality. Now, normally it's all combined into what we present and who we are, but sometimes we might be kind of different when we go to church, or different when we go to work, or different at home with our spouse. Those are different ego states. Now, one way to understand that is in a way to imagine multiple personality. In hypnosis, each of these ego states can present as a different personality. We don't notice it because we are more integrated, okay? But what happens in a marriage, when we first meet somebody, we connect and we think, oh, I like that part about that person. Oh, I like that part. Oh, I like that part. And we begin to connect, and then we decide, hey, overall, this is a good person, and I can live the rest of my life with them. Okay, so we grow together, and as we get into different traumas, then there's other ego states that then get involved, and we learn more about our spouse, more about the different thoughts and feelings and perceptions and the perspectives on different things. If someone isn't staying focused and committed on the relationship, what can happen, and does happen with couples at times, where let's say this person, they have these ego states that's not connected, those are not connected over here. And so they meet somebody at the office or at the sports club, and this part of them connects there and connects there or here. And they think, oh, this is more fun. My partner here, over here, that's not part of their personality. That's how a person gets sidetracked with someone else. So it's important to eliminate that connections. When you feel your partner is not fulfilling all of their needs, all of your needs, which actually no partner really can. It's just not how we're made. It's learning to let go of certain expectations, okay? For example, one of the things when I was in high school, I said to myself, Self, you're gonna find somebody that is very musically inclined, and plays the piano really well because I love the piano. I love listening to the piano. And so I meet this beautiful woman and she doesn't play the piano. Well, I fall in love with her anyway, and we get married. She can play a few things. She's pretty good at chopsticks, and she can actually play a little bit more than that. But one thing I had to do was grieve the loss of that idea that my spouse is not going to be able to play the piano. The alternatives is I find other ways to enjoy the piano. I can listen to that on the radio, you know, and I can practice the piano myself and enjoy the piano myself. It's been nice. I have children learning the piano and playing the piano. I get fulfillment that way, but learning to just know that that's not something my wife's going to be really good at. She has many other wonderful talents and does well, but that was a big adjustment that I had to let go of that expectation of being happy and satisfied with my spouse. I hope this makes sense. When you have a part that you haven't connected with your spouse, and actually some of these ego states might not even like your spouse, and vice versa. There are things about our spouse that we may not really like. We can love them, and there's obviously, usually it's a two-way street. That's the goal of learning and respecting and just being kind, because over time, as we are kind, then those boundaries soften and we learn to appreciate and love our spouse for who they are rather than who we want them to be. As we learn to love them for who they are, it's actually beautiful to see more and more of who they are, and the things that you wanted that they don't have become a non-issue, or they actually develop that trait. That's a lifelong work. I was having a conversation and it came up, what's the longest a couple that has been married that you have counseled? And my answer was 68 years. I had a couple come in that had been married for 68 years. And you think, why do they need counseling at that age? Well, at 92, the husband retired off the ranch. He'd worked up to 92, and now he was home all the time, underfoot. She wasn't used to him being in the house all the time. And he was sitting there on the couch, bossing her around like she was one of the ranch hands. And she'd been managing the household for that long. And says, I don't need your instructions. So we were able to help them make that transition to being together more and to give more respect to space and setting those boundaries. We accomplished that, I think, in 3 or 4 sessions. When they drew the new boundary lines and they had an understanding of that with each other, then they were able to get along fine with that.